Janesville Academy for International Studies.
Hi everyone, we are from the Janesville Academy for International Studies in Wisconsin. My name is Kaylee.
And I'm Brad.
I'm Bryce.
I'm Caleb.
I'm Diego.
We also had another student who helped work on the project with us, but he was unfortunately not able to come. His name's Isaiah Tureen. He will be in our presentation, which will be a live news feed, so enjoy. Hello and good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to JAIS News. My name is Kaylee Rossing.
And I'm Brad Allen. The focus of our program tonight is nuclear non-proliferation.
Nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament is one of the most significant issues of our time. We begin our coverage of this topic with the history of nuclear weapons and the technology that can either benefit our society or potentially destroy it.
Covered radioactivity when phosphorescence and uranium salt. Thus, mankind's relationship with French scientist and physicist Henri Becquerel accidentally discovered radioactivity when he was doing research on phosphorescence and uranium salt. Thus, mankind's relationship with nuclear energy was born. The dual nature of nuclear technology has benefited us and is yet one of humanity's most dangerous discoveries. It can have many advantages. Nuclear energy is a nearly renewable energy, does not create air pollution, and it reduces our dependency on fossil fuels. The negative impact, however, may outweigh the positives. There are some rare occurrences in which a nuclear plant may melt down and create massive destruction. Also, when disposed of improperly, it can be very harmful towards the environment. Most importantly, nuclear technology can be utilized to cause destruction and catalyze warfare. The basic components to a nuclear explosion involve plutonium-239 in the primary explosion and uranium-235 in the tertiary explosion. Positively charged protons become paired with neutral neutrons. The physical impact of nuclear weapons is absolutely catastrophic, having the potential to kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. There are three types of nuclear weapons: thermonuclear, gun type, and implosion. A thermonuclear weapon is a design type of nuclear weapon that utilizes the heat created by fission to ignite the nuclear fusion stage. This results in a greatly increased explosive power. An implosion is when a sphere of plutonium that is less than critical is surrounded by explosives. When the explosives go off, the plutonium is compressed into a high density and explodes. A gun-type nuclear weapon detonates by shooting a hollow uranium bullet at a cylindrical target. These pieces are considered subcritical components, and when they meet, they form a supercritical sphere. An example of a gun-type nuclear weapon is Little Boy, the bomb detonated over Hiroshima. The development of nuclear weapons is inextricably linked to a war-torn 20th century. In the 1930s, the Soviet Union became interested in the newfound technology and started working to advance their nuclear physics program. 9 years later, World War II had begun, and the US feared that Germany was producing weapons of mass destruction. It was then that the United States began the Manhattan Project. By 1945, the US had completed 3 atomic bombs using nuclear technology, and President Truman ordered for 2 of them to be used. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 200,000 lives were claimed by these new and extremely devastating weapons. In 1949, the USSR developed their own nuclear weapons, signaling the beginning of the Cold War. In 1961, the Tsar Bomba, the largest nuclear bomb to ever be detonated, was tested in northern Russia. The explosions was felt from nearly 600 miles away and broke window panes in northern Scandinavia. 18 years later, on March 28, 1979, an accident at 3 Mile Island nuclear facility resulted in the release of radioactive gases. Evacuation of 140,000 pregnant women and preschool-aged children from the area was ordered. Cleanup started in August 1979 and officially ended in December 1993, with a total cleanup cost of about $1 billion. In 1986, the worst nuclear disaster in history occurred at the Soviet nuclear plant Chernobyl in Pripyat, Ukraine. Chernobyl cost a total of 31 lives and over 18 billion rubles. The radiation levels were so high in some areas nearby that a person could die from exposure in just 1 minute. The disaster in Chernobyl went on to cost Russia billions of dollars, placing a strain on its economy to contain the disaster. Many nearby cities are evacuated, displacing hundreds of thousands of people. Pripyat, a city of 40,000 people, was left completely abandoned. The disaster's radiation could take as long as 800 years to clear up. After the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Cold War came to a close, and the US decided to halt its program of nuclear testing. Ceasing production of new nuclear weapons, the US reduced its stockpile in half by the mid-1990s. History witnessed the second worst nuclear disaster in March of 2011 in Japan. The Fukushima nuclear power plant was hit by a tsunami, causing a massive meltdown and an evacuation of around 300,000 people from the area. This event serves as a sobering reminder of the precarious relationship humanity has with nuclear technology.
The history and politics of disarmament and non-proliferation is a complex subject. In an effort to better understand the past and present circumstances surrounding these various treaties and agreements, we were lucky enough to sit down with renowned policy expert Isaiah Tureen.
With us here today, we have Dr. Isaiah Tureen, a leading expert on nuclear energy and policy. Welcome, Dr. Tureen.
Thank you.
So I'd like to begin by discussing U.S.-Russian bilateral arms control.
Sounds good.
Let's discuss specifically the SALT and STAR treaties.
Well, these treaties, they came into effect near the close of the Cold War. And when the two nations began disarmament of their nuclear accelerated programs.
Indeed, go on.
They first began around 1969. However, they did not come into effect until the late 1980s and early 1990s. Both nations agreed to reduce their nuclear arms as well as the tensions between the two countries.
And the SALT agreements were to lead up to the STAR agreements, correct?
Exactly. The SALT talks were conversations meant to discuss reducing arms, increasing bilateral cooperation, but the STAR treaties, now those really began halting nuclear production and ceasing of nuclear enrichment programs. These agreements did not seize previously built weapons, however, as both nations still maintained the stockpiles that they possessed during the conflict.
Now what about other nations that have given up their nuclear weapons in the effort to promote nuclear non-proliferation?
Well, there are only a handful of nations who have voluntarily given up their nuclear arms, the more well-known being Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, all three being nations that formerly belonged to the Soviet Union. During the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1989, these countries returned their weapons to Russia. But less is known about South Africa, which constructed 6 uranium bombs during the 1970s and dismantled them all very shortly after. Brazil also pursued nuclear weapons, but disbanded its programs and signed several agreements in which they stated that they were no longer going to pursue nuclear arms.
Although many nations have given up their nuclear weapons, there are a handful of nations that are pursuing nuclear weapons, correct?
That's very much so. There are a multitude of nations which desire nuclear energy, and also some that would desire using that energy for terms of nuclear weapons. Iran is a prime example. Iran is a signatory member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, however, has begun pursuit of nuclear technology. This labels Iran as a rogue nation. Now, Iran has claimed multiple times that their nuclear energy research is for the purpose of peace and energy. But the US and many of its allies reckon that with Iran's animosity towards Israel, that they are very willing to weaponize its energy.
And how has the U.S. responded to this illegitimate pursuit of nuclear energy?
Well, the United States and several of its allies have placed severe pressure and sanctions upon Iran in an effort to sort of stagnate the growth of this nuclear energy research. The United States and Iran recently signed an agreement which has frozen Iran's nuclear program in exchange for lifted sanctions. This deal expires on July 20th of this year, however.
And why is the U.S. so strongly against Iran having nuclear capabilities?
The United States is concerned that an Iran armed with nuclear weapons could be a threat to international security. Iran has severe hostility towards the surrounding nations, particularly Israel, a major United States ally. And if both nations, Iran and Israel, were to possess nuclear weapons, the situation could very well unfold into a polar quagmire, such as the situation in India and Pakistan. And that's something the United States just can't have happen.
Indeed it could. And I think that many world leaders would agree that the situation needs careful mediation.
These two nations have very tense relations, and the nuclear power possessed in the region is highly dangerous.
Nations like the U.S. monitor situations like this one very carefully, and I believe India and Pakistan have a non-attack agreement, correct?
Correct. India and Pakistan have signed a bilateral agreement that states that nuclear energy plants are not to be used for the purpose of attacking each other or as the target of attacks. With the treaty, both nations have exchanged lists of all functional nuclear facilities. There are many treaties like this which regulate and prohibit nuclear arms and enrichment.
What are some of these treaties?
Well, the SALT talks, which you mentioned before. Other treaties prohibiting nuclear weapons would be the African Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Agreement, which prohibits any nuclear weapons in Africa, and the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone, which prohibits any nuclear testing in the South Pacific.
And how might these treaties work together to control nuclear weapons usage?
Well, the basis of these treaties is to cut down on the number of nuclear weapons, and all of these instruments, these treaties, these agreements, they all have the same basic goal, to achieve complete nuclear disarmament. Now, these treaties all have their own specific purposes, such as total prohibition of nuclear weapons in a region, whereas others merely prevent nuclear attacks in an area. But each of these instruments works with the others in a broad effort to reduce the amount of total nuclear weapons.
And how does the IAEA come into place with these treaties?
Well, regarding the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the International Atomic Energy Agency conducts regular inspections to ensure that nations are using nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. The NPT works to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, and the other treaties work to prevent any violence from nations which possess them.
What proposed ideas and agreements have been discussed internationally that regard nuclear non-proliferation?
There have been a few recent movements towards non-proliferation. In April of 2009, United States President Barack Obama reignited global non-proliferation efforts during a speech in Prague. In September of that same year, the United Nations Security Council unanimously passed Resolution 1887, which called for accelerated efforts towards total nuclear disarmament. In December of 2011, the number of states who had ratified the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty increased to 157, heightening appeals to countries such as the United States, Israel, and Iran to follow suit.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Treen. We've discussed a lot of good information, and good luck with your further research.
Thank you.
More recently, we discovered that some students from the Janesville Academy for International Studies were taking matters into their own hands and formulating solutions to this nuclear conundrum. Here with us today on staff are students Caleb McCarthy, Bryce Christopher, and Diego Castro. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
So tell us a little bit about your ideas. Where did they come from, and how do you think they apply to the current status of nuclear weapons in the world?
Well, we had studied different treaties in the past and tried to come up with ways to improve them. One idea we had was the addition of dates to the already active non-proliferation treaty.
Yeah, and we felt that this treaty was sufficient enough with its guidelines, but lacked emphasis on how important disarming nuclear weapons is. Our solution was simple. We felt that adding certain deadlines would help speed up the process.
That sounds like a very reasonable solution, but what would motivate countries to comply with these regulations?
Yeah, that was our next question. We decided that punishing countries that didn't fulfill the requirements was an obvious step. But in addition to that, we would give positive encouragement to those who did.
And what would this positive encouragement consist of?
A few of our ideas were that the countries that met the deadlines would be eligible for increased funding from the United Nations, greater ability for preferential trade status with other nations, or even special consideration for hosting international competitions such as the Olympics or the World Cup. The hope is that this would be an incentive for a nation to comply because of the revenue which could be made from these events.
And we felt that anything that could help bring more money and the development of industry into the country would persuade them to comply with additions to the treaty. But on the opposite end, the punishments would consist of things such as trade embargoes and other sanctions. Also, the IAEA will be given the power to impose sanctions based on the result of their monitoring in various countries. Right now, the IAEA lacks authority to punish countries for non-compliance with regulations.
Yeah, so the further a country complies with the deadlines, the more significant or advantageous the reward they will receive. We feel it is the beginning steps of a solution to an important issue.
So let's say your plan were to be put into action in the international community. What would you consider to be a reasonable time period for this disarmament plan?
Our proposal requires nations to create a resolution with benchmarks and dates, which states that they will no longer pursue nuclear weapons and or disarm those which they already have or are producing within a 20-year time span.
Along with that, benchmark goals and specific dates will include 5-year checkpoints. Each checkpoint will require a 25% reduction of nuclear stockpiles. The end result after 20 years will be the depletion of all nuclear stockpiles within the country. Different compliant countries will be at different levels in the reduction process.
So how exactly will this reduction process begin?
It's going to begin with the United States, Russia, China signing on as the key world leaders in reduction of nuclear weapon technology. As they have already signed the NPT, this plan is a visible sign of their dedication towards nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. These countries have already made verbal commitments to each other and the world to support this. The plan puts their words into action. Once other nations see world leaders complying, they too will follow. Benefits of compliance will reassure them of their decision. As more countries see and feel the positive impacts of lifted sanctions, international support, and economic success, countries will share their experiences, encouraging others to do the same.
So you believe compliance with your plan is based on sort of a global peer pressure with an added benefits package?
Basically, yes, but if you choose not to, international exclusion and sanctions will be applied. The IAEA and the UN Security Council will be regularly checking in and monitoring each country's reduction process.
So your reduction plan will require conscious dedication to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, but not just by countries, but the UN and IAEA as well. What about the countries that have yet to sign the NPT and simply refuse, such as Iran, North Korea, Israel, Pakistan, and India?
These countries are the last countries to acknowledge the relevance of nuclear non-proliferation. Therefore, these countries will be the last ones to accept the plan, or any other plan for that matter. We're not ruling them out, and we recognize their potential to eventually comply in the future. As these countries begin to see other countries complying, in turn receiving benefits, they too will choose to sign up with a 20-year reduction process. In addition, sanctions and international pressure will be put on these countries, making the benefits that much more desirable.
Though possibly idealistic at this point in time, we feel that more and more countries will want to comply, and the end result will benefit all countries. In our opinion, what previous and current international efforts are lacking is encouragement or benefits for complying with disarmament efforts, as well as sanctions for refusing to cooperate in measures to curb nuclear proliferation. In addition, this plan establishes a 20-year timeline for each country to achieve the ideas and goals that many already agree with.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time, and good luck with your future endeavors on this subject. The information disclosed here today may allow humanity to take big steps forward dealing with nuclear weapons. I'm Kaylee Rossing.
And I'm Brad Allen. Thanks for tuning in.
Any questions?
You said that countries like India, China would be less likely to sign on to your proposed plan of embargo sanctions and offering a monetary reward. What about a country like the US that has a lot of money and that other countries would be more hesitant to sanction the US? How do you think the US would figure into that plan? Would they be willing to, if they just chose to be defiant and not participate?
The United States. Well, we are in debt as a country, and any money will help us. It's going to help us, our economy.
And we feel that we already signed the NPT, so we have a verbal promise to help with this crisis. And so we feel that if we're going to sign the NPT, we might as well back it up with action. So we can't be all talk and not be able to walk the walk, so to speak.
China has also signed the NPT. How does that differ? How do the two cases differ between the US and China?
Both, it'll always benefit their economy. They're both, big superpowers, and it's going to help them regardless.
We feel, oh, sorry. I was gonna say, we feel that like our plan is basically just an outline for what could happen. So, sort of speaking in, like beginning terms of, hopefully following through with this, they would understand, along with everyone else who has signed the treaty, that if you don't take steps forward, you will get punished, and if you do take steps forward, in the end, you can only be benefited.
Awesome, thanks.
Hey guys, great presentation. My question is, what do you think the countries who are currently under, or who currently have security agreements with both the U.S. and Russia, how will they, do you think they will accept this plan? If, I know disarmament is where we want to get, right? Non-proliferation and disarmament is the goal. But in a dangerous world, countries rely on our commitments to them. So how would your plan factor those countries in?
Well, we kind of mentioned before that since this is such kind of like a basic rough draft, that we're hoping that the global peer pressure will kind of rub off. So if they see, the major superpowers in the world, actually going along with this plan, that hopefully, and that's all it is at this point, is hope, that they will comply later on or right away with, the agreement of the treaty.
Okay. Well, no more